Have you ever wondered why God raises up ordinary men to confront empires? Why the Creator chooses the most unlikely vessel to break chains that seemed unbreakable? The story of Moses is not just history, it is prophecy in motion, a divine map for your own journey of liberation. You live in a world where invisible pharaohs still demand your servitude, where fears, addictions, and secret battles try to enslave you. Yet Moses' story whispers a shocking truth into your spirit. If God could transform a stammering shepherd into the liberator of nations, he can awaken a divine destiny inside you that no chains, no oppressor, no failure can hold down. Moses was not born into ease. He entered the world in Egypt during a time of genocide, when Pharaoh commanded every Hebrew boy to be thrown into the Nile. Imagine the fear pulsing through his mother's veins as she hid her newborn for 3 months. Faith is often born in hidden places, and so she placed him in a basket, setting him afloat upon the waters that were meant to destroy him. Do you see the irony? The very river of death became the river of deliverance. And in your life too, the things that were supposed to drown you often carry you into your destiny. Romans 8:28 resounds here. All things work together for good to those who love God. What your enemies design for destruction, God secretly designs for elevation. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, Moses looked like an Egyptian prince, but inside burned the blood of a slave. He lived in 2 worlds, torn between comfort and calling. Many chosen ones today know this secret tension. You appear to fit in where you are, but deep inside you know you don't belong to the system surrounding you. That inner restlessness is not weakness. It is God's whisper that you were created for something higher. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Moses' thoughts could never be dyed with Pharaoh's luxury. He carried a holy unrest that prepared him for confrontation. Yet Moses' first attempt to fulfill his destiny ended in failure. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and in a burst of anger, he struck the Egyptian dead. Hidden in the sand, so was his guilt buried. Isn't it shocking that the man destined to be a deliverer began his mission as a murderer? This is the divine paradox. Your greatest calling often emerges through your greatest failures. The Stoics teach discipline of impulse. Psychology teaches us to master the shadow within. But Scripture shows us that even when you stumble into darkness, God can redeem you for light. Exodus 2:15 tells us Moses fled into Midian, a fugitive in exile. Sometimes God must remove you from the palace to prepare you in the wilderness. In Midian, Moses met Jethro's family, married Zipporah, and became a shepherd. Can you see the divine irony? The future shepherd of Israel was trained not in Pharaoh's throne room, but in the desert's silence. Day after day, guiding sheep across barren lands, he learned patience, resilience, and the discipline of obscurity. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Moses' hidden years were his proving ground. And in your life, the desert seasons where you feel unseen are not wasted. They are sacred classrooms where God forges your soul in fire. Then came the burning bush, a divine interruption that shattered ordinary reality. Exodus 3 says, Moses turned aside to see a bush that burned but was not consumed. That phrase, "turned aside," is the key. Many people see signs, few pause to investigate. Destiny is hidden in the moments you dare to turn aside, to stop and listen. And from that fire, God called his name twice. Moses, Moses. Do you realize how shocking it is that the infinite God addresses you by name? This is where fear and purpose collide. Moses argued with God, confessing his stutter, his inadequacy. But God replied with the most divine reassurance, I will be with you. You don't conquer Pharaoh by eloquence or strength. You conquer by presence, by the God who walks beside you through the fire and flood. Psalm 23:4 echoes, Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You may be trembling at your own burning bush moment, doubting your worth, feeling inadequate for the calling stirring within. But remember, God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. What you see as weakness, God uses as a stage for his strength. This is the shocking secret of Moses' journey. His stutter became the backdrop for God's thunder. His exile became the stage for deliverance. And now the time had come for him to return to Egypt, not as a fugitive, but as God's chosen weapon, carrying the staff that would soon split seas. Moses, the once hidden child, the once exiled shepherd, was about to stand before Pharaoh, the symbol of oppression, and declare words that would echo through eternity. Let my people go. When you stand before your own pharaohs, the forces that enslave your mind and spirit, you begin to realize how terrifying obedience can be. Moses did not stride into Pharaoh's court with confidence. He entered trembling, leaning on a staff and on God's promise. Pharaoh was not just a king. He was worshipped as a god, surrounded by armies, wealth, and the illusion of invincibility. To confront him was humanly impossible. But that is the very point. God does not call you to what you can do. He calls you to what only he can do through you. Exodus 7:1 records God's words. See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. Do you feel the shock of that statement? A stammering shepherd standing as God's representative against an empire. The plagues were not random miracles. They were targeted blows against Egypt's false gods. The Nile turned to blood, humiliated the river god Hapi. Darkness swallowed the land, shaming the sun god Ra. Every plague was a divine declaration that no idol, no system, no human power could rival the Lord. And yet, Pharaoh's heart grew harder. This is a divine warning. When you resist God's voice, your heart calcifies until even pain cannot soften it. How often have you seen people suffer consequence after consequence, yet cling stubbornly to pride? The Stoics say that suffering reveals character. Scripture shows us it also exposes rebellion. Meanwhile, Moses carried the weight of rejection. The very people he came to liberate groaned, "Why have you brought this trouble on us?" You know this feeling. When you obey God, and instead of applause, you face accusation, when those you're trying to help turn against you. Psychology calls it resistance. Scripture calls it testing. Will you keep going when obedience costs you approval? Moses had to learn that liberation is not about pleasing people, but about obeying God at any cost. Then came the night that changed history, the Passover. A lamb without blemish was sacrificed, its blood painted on doorposts as a sign. When the angel of death passed through Egypt, every house covered in blood was spared. Do you see the hidden foreshadowing? This was not only Israel's deliverance, but a divine shadow pointing to Christ, the Lamb of God, whose blood would cover you and secure your eternal freedom. Liberation always comes through blood, whether on the doorposts in Egypt or on the cross at Calvary. As the cries of Egypt rose into the night, Pharaoh finally broke, commanding Israel to leave. But freedom is never given easily. Soon, Pharaoh's army pursued, cornering the Israelites between the Red Sea and death. Do you remember what Moses said in Exodus 14:13? Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. Imagine the scene: waves crashing, chariots thundering, fear rising, yet with a single motion of the staff, the sea split, walls of water standing on either side. Israel walked through on dry ground, while the pursuing army drowned in the very waters that had opened for God's people. Isn't it shocking how God turns the enemy's weapon into your deliverance? The river, meant to drown Moses, became his rescue. The sea, meant to trap Israel, became their freedom. Romans 8:31 declares, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" But the wilderness revealed a deeper slavery, the bondage inside the human heart. Free from Egypt's chains, Israel longed for Egypt's food. They grumbled about manna. They doubted God's presence. They built a golden calf. And don't you see the mirror? You too can be free in body, but enslaved in mind, delivered outwardly, but still chained inwardly. This is why Moses climbed Sinai, entering the cloud of fire, to receive the law that would shape a people into a nation. For 40 days he stood in divine presence, his face radiant with glory. And yet, while he was in the heights, the people were in the depths, bowing to idols. The warning is clear. While God calls you upward, temptation always calls you downward. Moses shattered the tablets in anger, but God, in his mercy, wrote them again. This is the secret of divine covenant. Even when you break it, God is willing to renew it if you turn back. Seneca once said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." The Israelites' failure became the soil for a renewed covenant, proving that God's grace runs deeper than rebellion. Still, Moses' burden grew heavy. He cried in Numbers 11:14, "I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me." Do you hear the humanity in those words? Leadership feels crushing when you think it all depends on you. But God responded by sharing his Spirit with 70 elders, showing that divine calling is never carried alone. In your own trials, you must learn this hidden wisdom. You are not meant to bear every weight alone, for God places people, his Spirit, and his presence to sustain you. Moses, the Liberator, had led a people out of Egypt, but now the wilderness would test their faith, their patience, and their hearts. And just like them, you are always moving between Egypt and the promised land, between bondage and destiny. The question is not only whether you can leave Pharaoh behind, but whether you can let God remove Pharaoh's grip from your heart. When you walk through deserts, it is not the lack of water that destroys you first, but the lack of vision. Israel had seen the Red Sea part, yet when thirst and hunger pressed in, they whispered, "Did God bring us here to die?" You know this voice, the voice of fear that erases every miracle you've experienced, the voice of doubt that convinces you your future will mirror your worst day. And in those moments, the wilderness exposes what Egypt imprinted in you. The longing for old chains disguised as comfort. The Stoics would call it the discipline of enduring hardship. Scripture calls it faith, the evidence of things unseen. Hebrews 11:1 whispers that faith is substance, not illusion, And Moses' life was a living sermon of this truth. The wilderness became a classroom. Water flowed from a rock, manna rained from heaven, quail filled the camp. Each miracle came with a warning. Do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from God. Moses, in the solitude of the mountain, met with God face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Imagine the awe, fire, thunder, and yet the still voice of the Eternal revealing his law. The 10 Commandments were not rules to bind freedom, but to protect it. They drew a boundary line between covenant people and enslaved souls, teaching that true freedom is not doing what you want, but becoming who God created you to be. Yet as the tablets of stone were engraved above, the people below engraved idols into their hearts. They melted gold into a calf and bowed before it. You must see the hidden meaning. When faith delays, impatience builds idols. When God's timing feels too long, your heart secretly crafts substitutes. The people danced around a lifeless statue while the living God's glory thundered on the mountain. How often do you do the same, trading eternal glory for cheap, immediate comfort? Moses descended with fury, shattering the tablets, a symbol of a covenant already broken. And still, God's mercy prevailed, rewriting his law as he rewrites your story after every fall. But even as God renewed covenant, rebellion never vanished. Korah rose up with pride, questioning Moses' authority. Others grew tired of manna, craving Egypt's flavors. Miriam and Aaron themselves spoke against their brother. And here is the shocking truth. Sometimes those closest to you will doubt you. Sometimes even family will resist the calling God has placed on your life. But divine purpose does not crumble under human criticism. Numbers 12:3 describes Moses as very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. Humility was not weakness, it was hidden strength, the discipline of trusting God's vindication instead of demanding his own. Then came Kadesh, the border of promise. The land of milk and honey stretched before them. But 10 spies brought back fear, while only 2, Joshua and Caleb, carried faith. Fear spread like fire, and the people wept, choosing the comfort of slavery over the risk of destiny. God's judgment was heavy. This generation would wander until it died, their inheritance delayed, but not denied. And here you must grasp the divine warning. Doubt will delay your destiny. Fear secretly builds walls taller than any giant in Canaan. You cannot enter promise with an Egyptian mindset. The desert years shaped a new generation. They saw serpents strike in judgment, but they also saw the bronze serpent lifted high as healing. Jesus would later reveal the mystery of this sign. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. John 3:14. Even in judgment, grace foreshadowed salvation. Every wilderness moment is a hidden prophecy of Christ, reminding you that your failures are not the end, but pointers to a greater deliverance. Moses himself wrestled with anger. At Meribah, when the people cried out for water again, God commanded him to speak to the rock, but anger overtook him, and he struck it twice. Water flowed, but Moses had disobeyed. The consequence was devastating. He would see the promised land, but not enter it. And here lies a divine lesson. Miracles can still flow even when you are disobedient, but disobedience leaves hidden scars on destiny. Leadership demands self-mastery. Even one moment of uncontrolled passion can cost you more than you imagine. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power, but you cannot control it." over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Moses, the meekest man, stumbled in self-control, and it altered his future. Still, Moses pressed on, carrying the weight of a nation, shaping their laws, interceding when God's anger burned. Time and again, he stood in the gap, crying, "Lord, if you do not go with us, do not send us up from here." His prayer reveals the hidden heartbeat of true leadership. It is not about land or victory or reputation. It is about presence. Without God, the Promised Land would be nothing more than another Egypt. And the same is true for you. What good is success, recognition, or achievement if His presence does not go with you? The years rolled on, and Moses grew older. His hair whitened, but his spirit still burned with divine fire. He recounted the law to a new generation in Deuteronomy, reminding them of covenant, warning them against idolatry, urging them to choose life. His words carried both urgency and tenderness. "I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live." Deuteronomy 30:19. Every choice you make is secretly a step toward life or death, destiny or ruin. Moses placed the decision in their hands just as God places it in yours. And when the time came, he climbed Mount Nebo. From its heights, he saw the land stretched out like a dream, a promise fulfilled yet not entered. Alone with God, the servant of the Lord breathed his last. Deuteronomy 34 says, "No one knew his burial place, for God himself buried Moses." Do you see the hidden beauty? The man who once floated in a basket hidden among reeds was now hidden once more, this time in the care of the Eternal. And though he did not step into Canaan, he stepped into something greater, the eternal presence of the God he had walked with face to face. Moses' story does not end there. Centuries later, on the Mount of Transfiguration, he appeared beside Elijah, speaking with Jesus. The Liberator of Israel stood in the presence of the true Liberator of all humanity. His journey had not been wasted. Every hidden trial, every shocking failure, every divine breakthrough had prepared the way for the greater story of Christ. When you reflect on Moses' story, you begin to realize it is not only about history, but about the hidden structure of your own journey. Every chosen one walks through Egypt, wilderness, and glimpses of promise. Egypt is the place of bondage, where fear and sin chain your worth, where Pharaoh's voice whispers that you will never be free. The wilderness is the proving ground where discipline is forged, where the secret tests reveal whether you trust God when the manna feels monotonous and the delays seem endless. The Promised Land represents destiny, fulfillment, the alignment of your life with God's eternal plan. But notice this truth: you cannot skip steps. Egypt must break you before the wilderness can refine you, and the wilderness must strip you before promise can clothe you. Moses teaches you resilience. His life echoes Paul's words in Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. The river that once carried him away became the instrument of deliverance. The palace that once educated him became the stage of confrontation. The wilderness that once humbled him became the classroom of leadership. Nothing is wasted, not even your pain. Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." Moses is proof that God secretly uses every difficulty as training, shaping a fragile vessel into an unshakable liberator. Yet resilience is not the same as perfection. Moses' failures are shocking reminders that even the greatest chosen ones stumble. His anger at Meribah, his reluctance at the burning bush, his outbursts of frustration, all testify that calling does not erase weakness. And here is your warning. Do not confuse being chosen with being flawless. God does not call you because you are perfect. He calls you because His strength is made perfect in weakness. This is why Paul could boast in his weaknesses, for in them the power of Christ rested upon him. Your cracks are not curses. They are openings through which divine light shines. But Moses' story is not only about his walk, it is also about the people he carried. Imagine the crushing weight of leading a nation that murmured at every turn, that begged for Egypt, even while walking under a pillar of fire. Moses bore not only his own struggles but also theirs, interceding as their mediator, foreshadowing Christ, who would bear the sins of the world. You too will be called to carry others, to stand in the gap for family, friends, or even strangers. Leadership in God's kingdom is not prestige, it is sacrifice. It is long nights on your knees, crying for mercy when others deserve judgment. It is pouring yourself out like water for those who might never thank you. The wilderness generation perished in circles of doubt, but a new generation rose, shaped by manna and desert storms, hardened by 40 years of wandering. Moses did not enter with them, but his fingerprints remained on their destiny. He prepared them to face giants, to cross rivers, to inherit what their parents forfeited. And here is a divine insight. Sometimes your role is not to step into promise, but to prepare others to enter. Sometimes your greatest legacy is not what you conquer, but what you cultivate in the lives of those who follow. This truth humbles you. It is not about you being glorified, but about God's purposes unfolding through you, even beyond your lifetime. Moses' final words in Deuteronomy still ring with urgency. He spoke of blessings and curses, of life and death, pressing the people to choose wisely. He warned them that hidden disobedience would lead to exile, but obedience would open divine abundance. His words carry a psychological edge too. Every choice you make rewires your life. Every action shapes your soul. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You become what you give your attention to." Moses knew this long before the Stoics. Fix your eyes on idols, and you will become hardened. Fix your eyes on God, and you will be transformed. And when he ascended Mount Nebo, gazing at the land he would never touch, there is something haunting and divine in that moment. You might ask, was it fair to lead for 40 years only to die outside the border? Yet hidden within this ending is a profound mystery. God himself buried Moses. Think of it. No monument, no shrine, no earthly glory, only the eternal laying his servant to rest. This was not punishment. It was intimacy. It was God saying, "Your journey ends with me." And centuries later, Moses would stand with Elijah beside Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration, beholding the true promised land. You see, destiny is not just about earthly fulfillment, but about eternal presence. Your promised land may not look like what you expected, but if it leads you into his presence, it is victory. Moses' story whispers to you across the ages, be faithful in Egypt, be resilient in the wilderness, be humble at the border of promise. Do not measure your life by what you see, but by who walks with you. Psalm 23:4 says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." That presence is the hidden treasure greater than milk and honey, greater than any earthly land. And when your journey ends, may you too be hidden in his arms, remembered not for perfection, but for faithfulness. The liberator of God's people leaves you with a final mirror. Your life will either echo Israel's complaints or Moses' persistence. You will either build idols in impatience or wait on the mountain until glory passes by. The choice is yours, and the time is urgent. For just as Moses lifted his staff, just as he lifted the serpent in the wilderness, just as he lifted his hands in intercession, so must you lift your eyes to Christ, the greater liberator, the fulfillment of every shadow, the end of every wilderness. The chains are broken, the Red Sea is behind you, and the promise lies ahead. The question is, will you walk in it? The chosen one does not chase temptation. They walk in God's light.